Hey guys, we're going to talk about something super fun. It's Harry Potter. Yay! Hey guys, and happy Fandom Friday. I thought I'd try something new this week. I have been a long-standing listener of a podcast called Alohomora. It is part of the MuggleNet family on MuggleNet.com. And they did a reread of Harry Potter for a very long time that I managed to catch, sadly, in Half-Blood Prince. So I did miss a great amount of the rereads. But since they finished the rereads a year or two ago, they've been doing in-depth studies of various topics or doing chapter revisits. So the fun thing about MuggleNet and Alohomora is they have an online community where you can then go and discuss what they discussed in the podcasts. All right, so I've always had a lot of fun participating in the talks and discussions on the Alohomora main site as you discuss whatever they discussed in the last podcast. There's usually a podcast question, or you can correct things that got missed, or sometimes they just don't remember because they only go sometimes chapter by chapter, and then they forget or aren't quite sure about all the details outside in the Potter universe, because as you guys know, the Wizarding world is fairly extensive. So I thought I'd introduce myself. I am Ravenpuff on the main site, and so I have had a lot of fun sort of debating things and talking and agreeing with all kinds of people, learning about the Harry Potter community. Now, as for my Harry Potter story, I actually was sort of older, but I was part of the Harry Potter generation, meaning that I was the right age when Harry Potter came out. I was actually 13, not 11, but I remember getting the first book from one of my mom's best friends in British, because we were in Europe, and rereading it and just rereading it and rereading it and rereading it to the point of death. I did fall off the community wagon there for a little while in high school because I was trying to be normal. As you guys can see, that has flown out the window, and we are all very happy for it, let me tell you. So I am a Hufflepuff. I actually am sort of half-half. Almost every test I do, and I've done it on Pottermore like 2 or 3 times now, I usually come out Hufflepuff, but my very strong second is, of course, Ravenclaw, so I am a Ravenpuff. I also come from a family of Ravenclaws, so it's one of those things. Now, my wand is actually kind of fun for me because it is a U wand with a Phoenix core. So I have Voldemort's wand. Luckily, mine is 11 inches and slightly springy, so hopefully it, is better for me than that. But it does mean it is a very powerful wand that is fun to deal with. So that is my story. I am a Hufflepuff, but also kind of a Ravenclaw. I do like to debate things. So I thought for this week, I'm actually going to talk about some of my responses instead of typing them on. And so if Alohomora wants to consider this a interview / the application to be a guest, go for it. I will tag people below. I love debating these things, and my husband sits there and giggles as I rant at the podcast about what they miss. Thankfully, there's always at least one presenter that says what I say afterwards, so it's really nice to go, okay, wait, they got it. They'll be there. Give them a second. So, this week, they just did a episode that comes out on Saturday, and it is episode 278, and it's Quidditch on Demand. So they were talking about chapter 8 of Goblet of Fire. So that is when they go into the Quidditch World Cup, and Harry is there with all the Weasleys, and it's just pretty much the game. So there was some debate about some of the things that you see in this chapter but aren't in this chapter. So things that you need to remember. So for example, the first thing that I noticed, they were talking about all the Muggle repelling charms on this stadium. Because as you guys know, the Quidditch World Stadium holds 100,000 people. And the first thing they thought is this is a really big stadium. But thankfully, Kat did some research and noticed actually most stadiums hold about 100,000 people. It is not quite a standard size, but it is a big size. So things like Olympic ones would probably be fairly big too. But they were talking about Muggle repelling charms and how, there must be no Muggles around. And the thing that was getting me is all the campsites in that area are Muggle run. And the thing that you see this in most is actually in chapter 7. So I will read, and hopefully this doesn't review too many copyrights. I'll probably paraphrase it so to not get into too much trouble. But I'm going to read some sections of chapter 7. Okay, so basically they were saying this is a really big community event for the Wizards, and they need to keep Muggles out of it. And so they talk about, there must have been huge amounts of planning to keep Muggles unaware of this many people, and specifically the issue with the campsites where Wizards were showing off. So there were castles with turrets, there were castles with peacocks, there were castles, they weren't just tents like you think of the Perkins tents. So it wasn't tents, it was striped silk affairs, full lawns, I forget what all they say, and they actually do walk through the entire thing. I think the whole Irish section looks like little hills covered in shamrocks. It's awesome. But why is this a big deal? Because Muggles were present and actually kind of a pain in the butt. And it's mentioned both in 7 and in 9 and kind of gets skipped in chapter 8, which they were covering. But there were Muggles present and it was kind of a headache. So one of the things they talk about is as soon as they land, after they take the port key, they run into Basil. And Basil goes, okay, Weasleys, you're in this campsite. You need to find Mr. Roberts. Diggory's, you're in this campsite. You need to find Mr. Payne. So already we know there are at least 2 Muggles, unless Mr. Payne is a wizard, which I'm doubting. There are already 2 Muggles on the premises the entire time, which just has to be fun. Trying to keep them from seeing blatant magic, because we talk about Basil running around chasing kids who have found Daddy's wand or kids on broomsticks because parents are having a lie-in. There's kind of chaos already happening, and they're trying to contain it, which, heaven help them, I would not want that job. But the first thing they bring up is Mr. Weasley comes to Mr. Roberts, and Mr. Roberts goes, Weasley, 2 tents booked a couple of days ago. And aye, said Mr. Roberts, consulting the tack list on the door. You've got a space up in the woods there. Just one night? That's it, said Mr. Weasley. You'll be paying now then, said Mr. Roberts. I'm sensing this is up somewhere in Scotland, Yorkshire area, just by the way they phrase it. Certainly, said Mr. Weasley. He retreated a short distance from the cottage and beckoned Harry towards him. Help me, Harry, as he handed them money. To which Mr. Roberts immediately goes, are you foreign? Not as an insult, but how do you not know how to use pounds in Britain? And so Mr. Weasley kind of cocks his head at him and goes, excuse me. And he goes, a lot of people have been giving me, they don't know how to use money, or they're wearing weird clothing, or some guy tried to pay me in a great gold coin. And it's things that wizards just aren't thinking about. And then sure enough, as soon as Mr. Roberts seems to know just a little too much, Basil shows up again. Oh, here he goes. It's people from all over, loads of foreigners. Not just foreigners, weirdos, There is a bloke walking around in a kilt and a poncho. Shouldn't he be? Asked Mr. Weasley. It's sort of I don't know, some sort of rally. They all seem to know each other, like a big party. At that moment, a wizard in +4 appeared out of thin air next to Mr. Roberts' front door. Obliviate, he said sharply, pointing his wand at Mr. Roberts. Instantly, Mr. Roberts' eyes slid out of focus, and his brow unknitted, and a look of dreamy unconcern fell over his face. I guess it's not Basil. We're not sure about which ministry wizard it is. He goes, I've been having trouble with him. Needs a memory charm 10 times a day. So poor child is having his memory wiped 10 times a day. So clearly he's on to something. There's no way to hide this, but at the same time, they're using Muggle campsites. Can you imagine booking out an entire Muggle campsite? I live right next to a state park, so I know what those look like. People around here would notice. People, like notice when my hair is blue. If they had that much going on, it would just be so hard to hide. And I imagine the ministry is losing their minds trying to keep people going quiet as they're getting into this event. And it must be amazing the stress and the security they're trying to put onto this. But so basically, I wanted to say there are muggles. It's actually muggle campsites. I think he also mentions he's not used to so many bookings in advance. Usually people just show up. So this is just sort of odd for these poor humans living in the moors that own these campsites. So there are humans, and they are running the campsites. And of course, Mr. Roberts and his family are actually caught up by the Death Eaters in Chapter 9 after the partying. They are the ones that get lifted up and turned about. And I remember right before they leave, Mr. Roberts is wishing everyone a Merry Christmas because he's had to have his mind so wiped that he's kind of losing it at this point, and he doesn't even know what time of day it is. So it makes you kind of wonder how much effect Obliviate has over time. Like, even if you're obliviating certain portions of it or just small pieces, it seems kind of extreme. So there are muggles at the Quidditch World Cup. The next thing that I thought was interesting was Rosie and them were talking about the omnioculars, which are very cool pieces of technology we haven't seen to this point, where basically they can capture the game and replay it sort of like DVR, where you can rewind and reverse and like you can see the names of things. And they were kind of curious about this, which intrigues me because maybe it's just because I'm married to a tech geek. We've had something like this for a long time. My husband had a program where our cable ran through the computer and then it could tape stuff for you. You could pause, rewind, and store a certain amount of technology, kind of like DVRs, but it was all on our computer. So this is something we've already had. Now, obviously, handheld device is a little bit more complicated. But at the same time, how is this any different than just using a digital camera on your phone? Like, they were talking, like, how much does this store? Is it just one game? Is it many games? Like, how would they know? Is it well, it obviously can't be pre-programmed because we don't know what they're going to do until they get to the game. But omnioculars, how do they work? And for me, I'm sitting there going, well, it's kind of like those programs in your phone where, or even like Amazon. We have Amazon Prime right now, so when we watch videos, you can actually click on the screen as you're watching an Amazon Prime video, and it'll list all the actors that are in that specific scene. So then you can go look up who it is. But anyway, so omnioculars, I didn't think this was that complicated of a technology. It is a little weird, but at the same time, it is something we see in current day, especially if you have a tech geek in your family. So things that record and save recordings are not that much of a stretch, though it is an interesting thought because this book is written in the 90s. So this is long before we had digital phones. It's kind of interesting that technology is almost caught up to where she was writing, kind of like it does in Star Trek, where we now see like the Google glasses that we saw in DS9 and flip phones that we saw in the original Star Trek. And let's face it, this looks familiar, doesn't it? They had e-readers all over the place. They had tablets all over the place. And so scientists have now taken from fantasy and from sci-fi and brought it to real world. And honestly, I'm super excited, and they cannot do this enough. All right, so the next section was house elves, because we see Winky for the first time in this one, and we learn about she's saving a seat for Barty Crouch, who never shows, and then later in the book, spoilers, you find Barty Crouch Jr. was there the whole time. And they were talking, it's a shame that he's not focusing on this thing that Winky fought so hard to get him to. He's stealing wands, he's not paying attention, he's trying to get information. And it's interesting, they were talking about how much he must have learned, especially about the Golden Trio, just during that interaction, including with the Malfoys, so that he could use it later while he was teaching them. So house elves, here's this entire debate. Are they beasts? Are they beings? And it seems like they're definitely sort of an indentured servant / slave. We're not quite entirely sure how that works, though it's definitely a parallel. And it does seem that some house elves super attached to their family, and not just in the, well, creature's just crazy, let's be honest. He is very attached to his family, but specifically to people who are nice to him. And the same Winky, while Dobby is not attached to his family, they're clearly very abusive of him. And he's also been odd, as declared by pretty much everyone in the series. Dobby is kind of an odd duck in his entire species. most house elves are okay with what they're going through. So it's kind of weird. They kind of have being status because they're not marked as beasts. And so I will read you the section from Fantastic Beasts where it talks about it. So basically, there's this entire debate in the wizarding community about what is a beast and what is a being and who should have rights and all this nonsense. Because there is the question of, like, goblins, who are fairly intelligent, but how much power do we really want them to have? And the same goes for trolls. And it talks about how trolls could be taught a few words, so then they were considered beings, but then it's just chaos. So in 1811, the definition found that most of the magical community found acceptable would declare that a being was any creature that had sufficient intelligence to understand the laws of the magical community and to bear part of the responsibility in shaping those laws. So an exception is made for ghosts who have asserted it is insensitive to class them as beings as they were clearly has-beens. And she's always funny like that. So basically, technically, and they talk about this in the Harry Potter Wiki, technically house elves are beings. But the house elf office is part of the Department for Magical Creatures. So kind of like the Goblin Liaison Office, they would be considered beings, but they're also considered beasts. So they're somewhere in between where they kind of need to reassess what they are and what all their capabilities are. It does seem, because, example, Hogwarts has hundreds of house elves. They seem to be their own entities. They seem to have their own families, but they don't seem to have any actual rights. Like there's no not minister, but there's no representative for them in the house of whatever in the Muggle or in the Ministry community. So, for example, in British law, there would be a House of Lords and a House of Commoners, and there's, just like in the House and the Senate here, there's a certain representative for a certain population. You'd think the house elves would have representation, but they clearly don't. They clearly sort of just have an office for control, kind of like those with lycanthropy, where it's not quite kosher. So there is that. They're talking, do house elves have families? And we do notice, I'm sorry, I don't have exact quotes because I didn't. There's just a lot of everything everywhere. So Hoki talks about her mama used to be the servant of Hepzibah Smith, and so house elves do seem to stay in the same family, and then their families serve said families for eons. So pretty much the manor comes with a house elf. So for example, the Blacks have house elves, and all their house elves, as they get old enough, have their head chopped off and stuck on a wall. So they're all related, which is kind of weird, but we're not talking about that one. So clearly there are family groups, and they don't really go into like house elf procreation, which is fine by me. Joe, I don't need that information. But there are families, and they seem to be connected. They don't seem to be transferred at all. Like they were kind of talking about the slavery in the U.S. and how families could be broken up and sent to separate plantations, and that doesn't seem to happen in the house elf world, or at least we haven't seen it happen. So there's that. But there seems to be this giant question of house elves. We just don't have a whole lot of information. So I went on to Pottermore, and honestly, there's not a whole lot written about them there either. So they're not in Fantastic Beasts. They're not on Pottermore. So all we have are the books. We know they have families because we've seen them reference families, though not all of them seem to have families. They're all connected to big families with manors, and for the most part, they seem fairly attached to the families they serve. So, for example, Winky is super attached to her family, and it's actually a horrifying experience later in Chapter 9 where she is dismissed. So, it's one of those things. It's interesting, actually, because as I was reading through Chapter 8 again, Ron's never seen a house elf. Like, they talk about Dobby, but he goes, oh, that's a house elf? They're weird. So this is the first time they've even thought about it. And I know Hermione is horrified later in the book to learn that house elves are all through the castle. And it's kind of like, kiddo, if Argus Filch is the only one lighting fires, and he's a squib, remember, that means he has no magic to light fires, clean halls, make food, clean dishes, there's just no way. I'm sorry. Just the size of the castle alone, makes it impossible unless there's automatic features like dishes doing the same thing as in Beauty and the Beast where they wash themselves. There's got to be somewhere there to make beds, to clean up things, to start fires. Y'all have never lived in a stone house. Those things get cold in winter, and let me tell you, that far north in Scotland, it's going to be cold for pretty much most of the year. So there's got to be that one. The other thing they talked about is sort of the prejudice that Harry immediately thinks of Dobby when he sees a house elf. And they do talk about how, well, Harry's only ever met one house elf being Dobby. And the thing that I found interesting is when he first says Dobby, all he sees is that it is a house elf, it has the ears, and it's in a tea towel toga. Now, he knows that Dobby has moved families, so theoretically he could have gotten a job somewhere else. He doesn't see that Winky has slightly different features because her hands are covering her face. She is terrified to be up north, so or that far up in the box, so she's literally hiding curled in a ball on a chair. You can't really blame him. Like, he immediately, as soon as he sees her face, knows that it's not Dobby. So I don't think this is a case of racism, speciesism. In the case of Harry, it's just he saw a house elf. He went, oh, house elf, Dobby, because that's the one he knows. He does immediately apologize and go, oh, wait, this isn't Dobby. I can see people going, oh, wait, that's who I think it is, and then getting there and going, wait, no, that's not the same person, especially if you're not seeing them clearly. At the same time, you can't really fault a kid who looks at someone, thinks they recognize him, and then realizes it's not the same person. Because I guarantee you've done that even with people of your own skin tone. I've done that a number of times, and I've had it done to me, especially before I started wearing the blue hair. When you're average height and you have average eye color and average hair color, you get mistaken for people's sisters, cousins, second cousins. I've been mistaken for a number of people. That, oh, are you what's-his-face's cousin? No. Or if you have a common last name in an area. Our last name is Stauffer. There are a lot of Stauffers in Lancaster County, especially in the Mennonite and Amish community. Are you related to that? No, we're not related to that Stauffer. So I don't think we should jump to prejudices automatically, is what I'm saying for this. Alrighty, so last section. Yeah, I know you guys, this is running long, but I love discussing Harry Potter, and it's just so much fun. The last thing is kind of an offhand comment, and it's kind of irritated me for a great amount of time. So this is nothing to any of the presenters. It's just one that I personally have issues with, and that is a defense of George and Fred Weasley. Everyone goes, they're not academic. And yes, there is a line saying Mom is mad that they didn't get as many owls as she would like. But y'all, just because they don't academically achieve does not mean they're not brilliant. And not academically brilliant. I would argue that they put just as much, if not as much, work as Hermione puts into her schoolwork. Okay, fine. They're not putting it into their schoolwork. But let's talk about this. The stuff they create, the amount of work they put in. And give me a sec, I'll backtrack. So the comment was, it's amazing that they managed to pinpoint that Ireland will win, but Crumb will catch the snitch. It seems to be an amazing foresight for them, that they were really analyzing it, and I work with sports geeks. They spend a lot of time analyzing everything everyone's ever done in their career to be able to figure out what they'll do next, especially if you're part of one of the, the fantasy teams. So that's not really that amazing, especially to me. And the other thing is, when they come out with the Wizard Wheezes, Ron goes, there's been explosions coming out of their room for years. We never knew they were actually doing anything. So they're basically being ignored, or at least not ignored, but kind of left to themselves. And here they are creating something useful, really trying to come up with a way to be self-sustaining, knowing that they don't want to be in the ministry like their father. And after that, how many jobs are there for wizards? Let's be honest. You don't learn a whole, even in book 6 where they talk about all the things you could do, or is it book 5? Book 5 or book 6? They talk about all the different things that a wizard could be. There's not that many outside of the ministry. You either have to, sort of hide into muggles, or you work in the ministry as something, or you own a shop in one of the wizarding communities, or you're independently wealthy. Let's be honest. Those are the three that we see the most. Yes, there is Magizoologist. I qualify them under ministry. Gringotts, I qualify under own something in the wizarding community. So like Florian Fortescue, like Ollivander, like Flourish and Blots, all those places. I'm sorry, Gringotts falls under that. So there's really only three categories you can pick. Now, there are some other things. I would argue that Harry's family outside of his father would be considered independently wealthy. Yes, they did create something with the Sleek Easy hair potion or whatever it is. But again, they had the funds to just play around with potions. We're not entirely sure if that was an actual thing outside of that. So here they are. They realize that they don't enjoy school, which, I'm sorry, for standard education, that happens to a lot of students, especially those that are high-achieving students. We talk a lot in education about how kids get left behind because they are too intelligent to follow the coursework and they get bored. And then instead of applying themselves to their coursework like Hermione does, they just waste time. They find something that interests them, a lot like Luna, where they do more research on their own and they explore things and they work hard on that. So I would put the Weasleys in that one, and I would almost wager that they could actually be Ravenclaws just with the amount of effort they put into the exploration and research of what they are interested in. And they've talked about this in the fandom community a little bit, where they always talk about Ravenclaws being the studious ones. I see them more as the ones that explore and sit and read and research things that are, to everybody else, totally useless and kind of irrelevant. It is one of those things where I would argue they are actually very, very intelligent and very, very high achieving. They may not get the grades, but they are intelligent. Alrighty guys, so if you've been with me through all of this, you can sense that this is something I am super excited about and would totally do if there is an interest in again, and might just do anyways, because I know they released their next episode is about part houses, and as you guys know, I am a buy house girl, so there will probably be a video because I'm super excited. There's a great number of hosts that talk about how you can't be in more than one house, which I disagree with, so I'm thoroughly excited to hear the debate and the conversation on the episode, and then I will bring you guys my opinion and all my comments to go with that. So, what did you guys think? Is this something we want to do again? I love discussing Harry Potter, so please make sure to comment below if you found any errors in my looking, in all my research. If you have any information, that'd be great. If you are not involved in the Alohomora main site, you need to get there, and there will be a link. There is a Alohomora episode every 2 weeks, so it's totally worth hearing, and I've been listening to them for a very long time. So they are just fun to listen to, and they have people from all over the world, so it's not just a one view of things. You have people from Britain, so we can get the actual British perspective. There's a whole bunch of people from everywhere else, and they always have at least one guest host that is a fan or someone in the industry. Like they've gotten Percy Weasley on. They've had, what is his name? They've had a number of different people on from in the industry. So we also learn things from like the movies or from theater. So they bring in people that actually have information, which is super, super cool. And this is something I'm very passionate about. So that is all I have for you this week. I am so sorry it's so long. Hopefully you had as much fun as I did. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, and all the things. And I will see you guys next Fandom Friday. Bye.